I should say, I do not speak for the university, but I firmly believe that I am speaking in its interests. This is not the convocation speech, nor the context I imagined when I was first invited to deliver these remarks. As a scholar and teacher of post-colonial literatures and human rights, I planned to highlight some of the many overlooked alums from the Global South who earned master's degrees here at Columbia University and went on to change the world. Instead, I am deeply conflicted about being here today, as I imagine some of you are. I am torn between two competing imperatives: the intense desire to celebrate your accomplishments in this annual ritual of valediction, and the intense need to respect the pain, sadness, despair, and anger that many of us feel about where we are now. I'm conflicted about being here, 5 miles north of Columbia's South Lawn, since one of the public excuses cited for forcefully clearing the nonviolent solidarity encampments was that student protesters jeopardized, among other things, this convocation ceremony. The sad irony that commencement was dislocated anyway is surely not lost on anyone. I am, however, most deeply conflicted about being here because my simply standing on this stage in formal regalia could be misread as endorsement of executive decisions over the past 7 months that have helped bring us to where we are now. Endorsement of the underestimation and vilification of our students and faculty, endorsement of lockdowns and a securitized campus, endorsement of the betrayal of the very purpose and values of a great university by its most senior administration. Let me be clear then that I stand here both in celebration of your incredible achievements and in dissent, dissociating myself from university actions and maintaining the faith as much as I can muster today in the essential mission of Columbia University and the critical importance of us, the students and the faculty. As we surely all know, this is not the first time protest camps have been pitched by Columbia students. It's not the first time students have occupied Hamilton Hall in an effort to make the university administration listen to their grievances and to raise their voices to the world. It's not the first time that Palestine and Israel have been flashpoints at Columbia and beyond. It's also not the first time commencement ceremonies at Columbia have been displaced by world historical events, by impassioned student protests, and by heavy-handed presidential reprisals against protesters. In 1968, students were on the march, protesting the brutality of US imperialism, especially the war on the Vietnamese people, Soviet imperialism in Eastern Europe, and racial segregation, discrimination, and injustice, not just in the Jim Crow US, but in apartheid South Africa, post-colonial Europe, and elsewhere. Globally, students in New York and Berkeley, Madrid and Paris, Belgrade and Prague, Mexico City, Rio, Kingston and Karachi, and too many other places to mention, sought radical social change, and everywhere they were met with repression, sometimes losing their lives for their brave determination to stand up against the forces of injustice. The parallels between '68 and today are too obvious to require more than sharp outlining. At Columbia in April of '68, students occupied Hamilton Hall and other buildings in combined outrage at the ongoing war in Vietnam and university plans to build a segregated gym in Morningside Park. After a week, President Grayson Kirk called in the NYPD. The vicious crackdown resulted in more than 700 arrests and more than 100 injured students. No protesters were expelled, however, and some went on to become faculty and administrators at Columbia University. After Kirk unleashed the police against his own students, Columbia relocated its commencement to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. The customary commencement speaker, the university president, was replaced by a member of the faculty. When history professor Richard Hofstadter stood to speak, a few hundred students walked out in protest to conduct their own alternative commencement on the steps of Low Library, the traditional site of both graduation ceremony and student protests. The same steps that were barricaded most of this past winter and are now off limits entirely to protesters. Hofstadter spoke eloquently of the Columbia community and the essential service we provide to society, to democracy, perhaps to the world. A university is a community, he said, but it is a community of a special kind, a community devoted to inquiry. It exists so that its members may inquire into truths of all sorts. Its presence marks our commitment to the idea that somewhere in society there must be an organization in which anything can be studied or questioned, not merely safe and established things, but difficult and inflammatory things. The most troublesome questions of politics and war, of sex and morals, of property and national loyalty. Hofstadter stood to defend this notion of community from the wreckage then of Columbia community in '68. He did not put it in quite these terms, but this special community is bound together by difference and disagreement, by the belief in truth and the obligation to pursue it wherever truth may lead, whomever it may trouble. We have suffered a disaster whose precise dimensions it is impossible to state, he said, because the story is not yet finished and the measure of our loss still depends upon what we do. And what we Columbians did in the wake of the disaster of '68 was to remake the university. Just 1 month after the most terrible of the tumultuous events, Hofstadter observed, "The constructive response has been a call for university reform. Powers need to be redistributed. Some new organs of decision and communication need to be created. A greater participation of students in university decisions." What we Columbians did after '68 was to create the University Senate, the student governing boards, our organs of shared governance, and our statutory commitments to free speech and to academic freedom. What we did was to articulate and enshrine our communal conviction that anything, including the university, its leadership and decision-making, can be studied or questioned. There are some who say that Columbia's rules, norms, and traditions around political speech and academic freedom especially were not made for this world, not made for this moment. Those people tend to view this moment as exceptional, thereby justifying extraordinary interventions and emergency measures that deviate from and obviate the most constructive reforms that came out of 1968. I, and I dare say most of my students and colleagues, disagree. Columbia's rules, norms, and traditions were designed precisely for this world, for this moment. They were forged from the fires of '68 in order precisely to prevent a repeat of those terrible events. They were designed precisely to provide a robust normative framework for facing challenges like those posed today by students protesting the indiscriminate death, plausible genocide and mass suffering in Gaza, and by students angered and deeply wounded by war crimes perpetrated against civilians in Israel. Our systems of shared faculty-student administration governance, enshrined in the post-'68 statutes, were designed precisely to ensure that the various populations of this university are in constant contact, deliberation, and debate over how to navigate such challenges. That we are, in other words, a community of questioning. These were the positive, if imperfect, consequences of the '68 turmoil. In his commencement speech, Hofstadter began by saying that trustees, administrators, and students tend to agree that in ultimate reality, the members of the faculty are the university. In the long aftermath of '68, most of my faculty colleagues and I would expand that to say, in ultimate reality, the members of the faculty and student bodies, that is you and me, are the university. Sadly, Sadly, after the past 7 months, I have some doubts about whether trustees and senior administrators would tend to agree. I believe that the whole of this university, the faculty and students, was made for precisely this moment. Dozens of you from a wide variety of MA programs have taken my classes at Columbia. I see familiar faces among this crowd. I direct the Institute for the Study of Human Rights, where many more of you have pursued master's degrees as a step toward working for social justice. I have a good sense of your commitments and your characters. I know the metal of which you are made. With its precious traditions of free inquiry in the classroom and the world-class painstaking research by faculty across all disciplines, with the urgent passions of students and the hard-won expertise of faculty, with some of the world's leading experts on Israel and Palestine, on Orientalist Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, on racisms and bigotry of all sorts, on colonialism, ethno-nationalisms and corporate capitalism, on free speech, student protests, human rights and social movements, this university is, if let to be, made for this moment. The social role of a university and higher education in general, its public service, is to make people uncomfortable, to make society uncomfortable, to upset orthodoxies that are accepted too easily, and to unsettle common sense that is congealed too quickly. A university is built for discomfort. It is not built for speed or political expediency. It takes long and slow, sometimes agonizingly slow looks at the most troublesome questions, the most stubborn problems, the greatest challenges of our time, and asks us to think again and then again about what is really going on, about why the world is as it is, about how we might live together otherwise. Professor Hofstadter ended his remarks with questions that are still relevant today. He said, friends outside the university who know how serious is the damage we have suffered have asked, how can Columbia go on after this terrible wound? I can only answer, he said, how could it not go on? The question is not whether it will continue, but in what form. Will it fall into a decline, or will it somehow be made even more distinguished? Hofstadter's questions, I have said, remain painfully pertinent today. However, I will leave you not with questions, but with affirmations. In solidarity with those who condemn and who seek to unteach and unlearn racism, prejudice, and bigotry in all its forms. In solidarity with those who oppose colonialism and imperialism in all their forms. In solidarity with those who are not here because they have been incited to fear or are in mourning or are simply fed up and demoralized. In solidarity with those who cannot be here because they have been treated as criminals rather than as students. And in solidarity with all of you who persevered in these extraordinarily troubled times to complete your degrees. Congratulations on your amazing achievements. I trust you will carry forward the best of what you have learned and unlearned in these years at Columbia, and a sharpened spirit of questioning, discovery, and debate that brought you here in the first place.
Thank you, Professor Slaughter. We now arrive